to people who are suffering with grief and trying to figure out how to overcome grief in whatever that grief might be, whether it's trauma or loss of a loved one. And we're going to talk about that on your show tonight. And so that was my dedication tonight.
Okay.
The show is brought to you by E4 Strength, which is my company. Beautiful part about being an entrepreneur is you can sponsor yourself. E4 Strength is the leading provider of eccentric strength training solutions. We are the maker and founder and patent holder of the E-Force technology, which allows us to attach to strength pieces of equipment like squat racks, half racks, things like that, and allows us to offload weight in either the down or the up direction. If you don't understand how muscle development works, that may not make a lot of sense to you, but I highly recommend you go to our website, eforcestrength.com, and do a little research and find out about eccentric strength training and how valuable that is in muscle development. So eforcestrength.com. All right. So Sherrie Dunlevy, how are you?
I'm well. How are you tonight?
I'm good. I'm very, 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 very good. Life is fantastic. I have no complaints. How's everything in your world?
Everything in my world is evolving all over again. The book is starting to really take off, and I've been fighting it for a long time, but this is the world that I'm supposed to be in. I'm supposed to be helping people who are hurting and helping other people help those they love who are hurting. And I'm fine with that. I am. I just, I always thought my heart was for women and women's causes and women's conferences. I just keep getting redirected back here. I really think this is where God wants me. And so I'm on it. That's what I'm doing.
It's amazing how sometimes when we get out of our own way and we think
Yes.
we have somehow the controls, we're along for the ride, and it's our job to pay attention to the changes in direction. And I'm glad to hear that you've noticed that and you're making the shift.
Yes. And it was hard because, living in the world of grief is not easy to do. I consider myself an empath, and so I absorb a lot of that sadness. For those who may not know, I was a former television news anchor and a radio talk show host. So for all those years and decades, I just gave you the worst of the world, right? I put it into your living rooms every day, twice a day. And that had an effect on me. I was able to compartmentalize it for much of my career. And you as a law enforcement officer, I'm sure you can compartmentalize. You have to for survival. But what happened with me was that my son died, and I was no longer able to do that anymore. All of a sudden, all of that bad news was just absolutely taking its toll on me. I was absorbing it. I was crying when I was doing stories on the news. It just wasn't working out. So now, all these years later, and God's asking me to come back to this world, I was just fighting it. And I was praying a couple of weeks ago, and it became clear to me that it's not that I'm supposed to be there at the new grief. My job isn't, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or anything like that. I can't counsel people, but what I can be is a living example of light and hope at the other end, to say, listen, it's possible. You know this as well as I do, Matt. It's possible to live a good, fulfilling, and happy life, even when you lose someone that you love dearly. It doesn't seem like it at the time, but just to know that there are people out there that are doing it does give you hope.
Well, that leads me into the very popular and only question that I've planned for the entire show, which is, who is Sherrie Dunlevy? See?
Well, let me just tell you, who is Sherrie Dunlevy? Sherrie Dunlevy is someone who wants to learn and grow and teach and inspire. That is the crux of who Sherrie Dunlevy is. It took a long time for me to figure out who that was. And it started, like I said, I was in television for 16 years. I was your nightly news anchor. And I did that very well. And I was very good at it, very successful at it. Stayed in my home community, was well known, was trusted, had relationships with people that I did stories on. But then, my son died, and my whole world changed. I had a 2-year-old at home at the time. I tried to go back. I went back probably faster than what they said I should have gone back. But I had all this maternity leave and no baby to take care of. And so, you always seek out that comfort zone. And my comfort zone was being the news anchor, being Sherrie McCutcheon. That was my maiden name when I was on the air. I go by Sherrie Dunlevy now. But so I went and to that comfort zone. But it didn't work out because I needed to be home and healing. And I needed to be home with my son. But I was learning another lesson because I was afraid to be that, because then I'd have to be a grieving mom. I'd have to be Sherrie Dunlevy, the grieving mom. And then I had to worry about, well, who was I going to be if I wasn't Sherrie McCutcheon anymore? Because that was my identity. So I've since found out that, your job isn't your identity. So that's why I describe myself. I don't describe myself, people describe me as an author, as a speaker. I call myself an inspirationista because I really feel like I'm here, put on this earth to inspire people to be their best, to live with passion and purpose and make an impact with their life. But, I don't have a label, so to speak.
I think that's good though now. Like
Mhm.
I've been in, I wear 1,000 hats. And sometimes none of them well, sometimes all of them fantastic, but I wear a lot of hats. But I've always been in the protecting and serving world. And so everybody
Right.
just assumes, and I have this, and I don't know if it was like that for you with the news, but I get a lot of people that will reach out to me on Facebook when they have an emergency. Rather than calling 911, I'll get a Facebook message on Messenger, and they'll be like, "Are you
Wow.
working? I need your help." And they'll like go into this, and I'm like, why are you messaging me on Facebook? Dial 911. I may not be available. I'm not always on duty. I'm not always available to handle things. So it seems like I'm always in this, to certain people, I'm always the cop. And did
Hmm.
you ever have that, like in friends in your, even people that are friends, but not necessarily your friends? Did they reach
Hmm.
out to you a lot when you were in the news, you know, wanting more information on something or, uh,
All the time. Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
exhausting.
Yeah.
It's got to be exhausting, especially when you're as, I mean, I'm well known in my community, but I'm not on TV. So it
Right.
had to be exhausting for you to have that much responsibility to deliver the news, but then also to be that
That
personality.
recognition.
Yeah.
Yeah. The recognition out in public. And I did better with it than my husband did. He married into it. It was more of an irritation to him, but I just told him people are just trying to be nice and trying to be kind and wanting to strike up a conversation. But yeah, that public persona. And so, what I think the hardest thing for me, and I dealt with it okay, and people knew that I was pregnant. They knew that I was having complications with my pregnancy because I was, on the air. But if you missed the news the night my son died, then you didn't know. And what was very hard for me, Matt, was to go out in public and then someone would say, "How's your baby?" And
Yeah.
then I was thinking, oh my gosh, I am going to totally ruin your day because I'm going to tell you he died. Then you're going to go home thinking, I'm so stupid. Why did I say that? And you're going to feel so bad about that, but you didn't know. And so it was, I just didn't want to be that anymore. I just didn't want to be that anymore.
Well, let me ask you
Yeah.
this, and we're going to really go deep, probably. I'm pretty sure into what happened with your son, your cycle of grief, your how you came through it, the things that your book was written about, which I think is one of the more interesting angles to take in a book that I've never seen before, other than with you. But we'll talk about all that. But let me ask you this:
Okay.
did you not? And I'm saying this from a place of similarity, in
Hmm.
that when you said I didn't want to be that anymore, that person that everybody knew, because you had now this massive trauma that occurred to you that some may or may not know, and that conversation was bound to happen when you're in the public eye? Was it more so the lack of wanting to deal with it anymore, or was it your lack? Did you lose your passion for TV journalism?
I lost my passion for it. Things moved up in the spectrum of what was important in my life. My family, my living son, and just trying to get better, trying to heal.
So let's talk about healing. Let's first talk about the complications, and if you're okay with it.
Oh, sure.
And what happened with your son?
Yeah. My son, and for those of you who are watching this, this is my doppelganger dog. His name's Ollie, and he does all my podcasts with me, even the ones that I host. It's better because he just always wants to be around me, but that's okay because it gives me a chance to nurture. Right. You know, where I missed out with my baby. You know, this is my furry baby. But anyhow, when I went in for my ultrasound, we wanted to see what the sex of the baby was. We didn't find out for our first son. But we wanted to find out this time. And as I was getting dressed, the technician came out and she said, "Mrs. Dunlevy, could you come back in? We need to take more pictures." And I just knew. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what it was, but I knew something was wrong. Well, at our little hometown, hospital, they were, "Oh, it's fine. It's a serious condition, but once he has the surgery, he'll be fine." Well, I have been doing telethons for children's hospitals for years. And so I had friends who were, pediatricians and pediatric heart surgeons. And so I called them. And when I told them what my son had, it was called a diaphragmatic hernia, he just got silent. And then I knew, oh, this is way worse than what my hometown doctor was telling me. And so I spent most of my pregnancy really trying to figure out what our game plan was. We went to Morgantown, West Virginia. We went to Philadelphia's Children's Hospital. We went to Pittsburgh Children's Hospital. And everywhere I went, everybody gave me different odds. But we were going through all these tests to find out whether we could have the surgery in utero. But his chances for survival were a little too high because they had to be the worst of the worst to do in utero surgery at the time. And so I delivered him in March of 1999, and 29 days later, he died. He did have the surgery after he was born. He did survive it, but there were just some complications, and then his organs started shutting down. And it was just, I live an hour away from the hospital, and it was just like in the movies, you're sleeping and you get the call in the middle of the night and you have to rush to the hospital, and it's an hour away. And it's just, all the horrible things that go along with it. So that's what happened in a nutshell. Is my son, we knew that there were complications. We did everything we could prior to him being born and after him being born to save him, but it just didn't work out.
What is your son's name?
His name's Brandon Joseph.
I'd just like to put that out into the universe.
Thank you.
It's, everybody has a name. Whether that their moment's 1 minute or 100 years, we all get a name.
Absolutely. And that's one thing I want to tell people is that if you have a friend or even an acquaintance and they've recently lost someone they loved, please use their name, because you know what? They're not going to hear it very much anymore.
That's a shame, because I don't know if you ever heard me talk about this, but I gave a talk to it was like a marketing company. They brought me in to speak, and I was talking, with the group, and the CEO of the company had said, and we're talking about life and what does it mean and the value of living and what is our purpose and all that kind of stuff. And he said he had heard from another speaker that this theory that you die twice, once when you take your last breath and the second time when your name is spoken for the last time. And that always just resonated with me. Like it hit me like a ton of bricks when he said it. And I thought to myself, what would it be like to never to have no one remember you? Like, what does that feel like? That is a worse death than dying. And I made it a point in my own life that I will do whatever it takes for the rest of my life to ensure that I impact enough people so that the odds of my name never being spoken again are so minuscule that I don't have to worry about it. And that's kind of been my, I don't want to say main focus, but I mean, it literally is why I get up every day, because I don't want to ever be in a position where I ever have to worry about that. And it's such a sad thought to think that my name might not ever get spoken again, that I don't ever want to think about it. So
Yeah.
when you talked about saying that person's name, it's important.
Right.
I want anyone to ever not remember those 29 days and not remember his name, and remember the impact that his loss had on you and your family and people that love you, and wanted to see this young child grow and become a man. I think it's important to always share his name. And I think when you wrote your book, and I think that's, I didn't consciously think about it when I wrote my book, but now I'm very happy I wrote the book, because now it will live forever.
Right.
The book will always be there. Like, there will always be, as long as I can't imagine that technology will regress. So I can only assume that my book will be available to many, many years after I'm gone. And I think that's the same for you.
Right.
So I guess the next logical progression is the shock and the trauma of that phone call that you got in the middle of the night, and you have an hour to drive to the hospital. Do you remember specifically how you were feeling during that hour?
Oh, sick to my stomach. Because you know what, there were so many ups and downs in the 29 days. There were so many times he was so close to death. And then there were times that we thought we'd actually there was hope, you know. And I remember just getting to one point, not that night, but one point in the hospital. And I just said, God, I just want you to make up your mind. I can't take this anymore. Make up your mind. If you're going to take him, please take him. If you're going to let him live, please let him live. But I literally, my heart can't take this not knowing anymore, you know. But you know, they don't call you to come up if it's not bad, and it was bad, and I knew.
When I was on your show, we didn't really talk about, it was more about me, obviously, because that's what we were discussing. But I wanted to, I'm so happy that you're on the show, because I wanted to find out more about your son, Brandon, and how his life, however short it was, impacted you and your husband. And then also your other son. What's your other son's name?
Trey.
And is that short for something?
He's Robert William III.
Kind of thought. That's right. Buddy mine's got a kid, Trey, and he's a third. Too,
yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Because it's while your son was 2 when it happened, I'm sure he has a memory or some understanding of the time period of what was going on then. Or was he a newly turned 2 kid?
He was actually newly
2
turned 3.
Okay.
When Brandon died. 2 when Brandon was born, and 3 when Brandon died. I remember Brandon was taking a turn for the worse, and they got him stabilized. And the nurse said, "You have to go home and throw your son his birthday party today." And it was just like, how do I leave one son and go be happy? You know, that was gut wrenching.
I'm sure. Wow. What was, let's break these into individuals.
Okay.
Because I think we can probably get all over the place in ping pong if we don't. Let's talk about your husband first.
Okay.
Because I know when my kids were born, like, I wasn't very aware of a lot of things when it came to I was during a period when I was in depression, but I really remember, like, when I need to be on, when my protector instincts need to be on point, I'm Delta Force. Like,
yeah.
I'm on point. And when I remember when my daughter was 5 weeks early, and I got the phone call from, I was at the gym, and my father-in-law had called, and this was, cell phones were not nearly what they are today. So I got a phone call from my father-in-law saying Lauren was at the hospital, and I needed to get to the hospital because my daughter was being born early.
Wow.
So I remember that drive. And then I remember when my son was being born, I was with my wife this time, and her water broke. And I remember it was like a 45-minute drive to the hospital. And I just kept thinking to myself, please don't let this child be born in this car. I got to get, because I wasn't there during the water breaking and all that stuff, like with my first, because my wife was 37 hours in labor with my daughter, who was 5 weeks early. So completely different where the water breaks. And all of a sudden, middle of sleep, my wife wakes me up. My water just broke. I'm game on. I'm Chuck Norris. I'm ready to go take down the world. So, but I remember those moments, and I'm sure that your husband, knowing the direness of that phone call, and how you were going to be feeling, and his own feelings on what was about to happen. Did you guys ever share any discussions about how each other felt during that hour ride to the hospital?
Well, we talked the whole time up there. We were both just so frightened. I don't know if we talked about that hour, and the sad thing is that, for both of us, it was so equally painful because, see, my son's condition was so dire that any stimulation to his body at all would kill him. So he couldn't even wear clothes. So for 29 days, he had a shield over him. Well, no, because, he had tubes going in and out of him, measuring all of his output. He didn't wear clothes. He had blinders on his eyes. He had cotton in his ears. I wasn't even allowed to stroke his skin like this. I could touch it, but I wasn't allowed to stroke it because that could too much sensory. And so this is the first time we got to hold our son as he was dying.
Oh my God.
So, processing that kind of grief, the wanting to hold on to your child, and it's the very first time, and that's all you've been wanting to do is hold your child, but you're holding your child as he's dying. So that was something that both of us had to do. And also, his body was filling up with fluid, so his skin was like tissue paper, and so it kept splitting. So it wasn't a peaceful, pretty death. Right. So there was a lot of feeling all over the place for both of us there.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry you had to go through that. That is it.
Unimaginable.
Yeah. And I don't, and I guess it has to be hard because outsiders looking in will look at your 29 days with your son and minimize that because it was just 29 days.
Right.
And how could you, it's not like my brother died when he was 21. So people will look at that and say, he was just about ready to live his life. And, he struggled for all those years, and it gives it a lot more value and context than a 29-day window. And absent hearing that, what you just shared, I'm sure people would minimize that in a way that is not necessarily as acknowledging of your grief as is deserved. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And I think that's sad that we live in a world that measures grief based on how much time did you spend with that person. And I mean, I've lost people that I've known short periods of time, and that window of time that I had with them was so meaningful that it hurt me when they passed. And I can only imagine giving birth to a child and 29 days later having to say goodbye. And then the way you described that goodbye was brutal.
Yeah.
And it just literally just tore my heart apart. And I just can't imagine that. And nor do I ever want to, but I can't imagine it. So,
you know what though, and I want to thank you for saying, how was your husband? Because so many times, especially when a baby dies, they all go towards the mother, and they forget about the dad, and they forget that he's grieving and that he's hurting too. And so, remember that should you have a friend or a relative or an acquaintance who, their wife has suffered a miscarriage. It wasn't just their wife who lost a child. They lost a child. The father lost a child as well. So thank you.
I just, maybe it's because I'm hypersensitive to loss and grief, as you are, that it impacts me more deeply when I hear those stories. I've been around a lot of death in my life, thousands of dead bodies, and I'm able to, you talked about in the very beginning, compartmentalizing. I'm able to take my work experiences and put them in a box, and they stay there. And there have been some that have been difficult. But I'm almost sometimes sad to think that some of them I didn't have a connection, an emotional connection to the moment, because my job wasn't to be that. My job was to be the cop, be the guy that is the one that handles the dirty work when a family is grieving over someone who passes in the middle of the night, and I have to go in there and get the coroners, and then it's this whole process that has to happen. It's very step by step and thorough, and I don't have the chance to have these kinds of conversations with people about their loved one. And I almost wish I could, but I don't know if I could compartmentalize it if I'd heard 1,000 of those conversations.
Yeah. In an industry like you are, the industry that I was in, the profession that you're in, the industry that I was in, you have to, for self-preservation, you can't, you know what I mean? Like, you would have to go through PTSD training every 6 months if you became emotionally connected to every single case that you did. You just can't. It's just not humanly possible. But healthy, humanly healthy and possible.
I'm so happy that I'm now doing this show, because it allows me to connect in ways that I was just not allowing myself to connect before. And I'll give you an example, and it's not one I'm proud of. It's not that I'm not proud of it. It's one that I wish if I could do a do-over, I would. My wife's sister passed about 4 years ago, and from cancer. And it had gotten to the point where we knew hospice was forthcoming, and my wife's family has a house down at the beach, and it was arranged that she would spend her last days at the beach. And the whole family was down there, and having been in this familiar place before, I was aware of where we were in the process, and just allowing everybody to sort of have their time with her, and with Tracy. Her name was Tracy. And when she passed, I had to make a choice. Do I grieve with my wife and children and my wife's family, or do I handle the situation? And I handled the situation. Part of me thinks I stole an opportunity to be there for my wife and kids, and my brother-in-law and my in-laws and everyone else, because I had to. I saw that everybody wanted to remain with her. And unfortunately, there was a delay in the time from when she passed to when the funeral home was coming, just from logistically that was far away, and it was on a Friday during rush hour. So I knew, having been in that situation, timelines of what happens afterwards, and I wanted to make sure no one saw that, like what happens afterwards. I wanted people to remember the few moments afterwards and not anything later. So I had to put myself in a position where I was stopping people from going in, and being more of the guard of the door as a cop, and managing the situation so that it could happen the way it's supposed to happen without hurting anyone else. And I wish I didn't have to do that. And I wish that I would have been able to just grieve with my wife and my kids. So I guess the purpose of saying that is that trauma and grief sometimes is unavoidable. And no matter how hard you try to manage the situation, the grief and the trauma still remains, except mine is more of a, how could I have handled it differently in that moment? And I think with your book and the way that you wrote it, it's very much similar to that. Like wishing people had handled the loss of your son differently with you. Let's talk a little bit about your book and talk about why you wrote it and why it's so important for people to read.
Well, when I wrote my book, How Can I Help? Probably 15 years past my son's death. But after my son's death, you have all these people rushing to you, which is wonderful, to hold you up and lift you up and carry you through. And from what I'm hearing from interviewing so many people is that you don't always remember the people who were there, but by golly, you know who wasn't there. And so there were some very, very, very close friends of ours who just kind of disappeared out of our life, or just said, I can't handle this, and never came back again. And so that was just a double loss, right? Triple loss. That here you are at the most horrible time of your life, and you need these dear friends, and they're just not there for you. And I just had to put that on the back burner and let other people lift me up and love me. But through the years, I just kept thinking, what was that about? Like, how could you ever possibly even do that? Like, I just don't even understand. And through the years, as I was getting healthier and healthier, healing from my grief, I myself have come up with 3 scenarios, although there may be more. I'm not saying that these are the only 3, but the 3 is that it just hits too close to home. You just literally can't deal with it. You're paralyzed, and it's just too painful, and you can't go there. The second one is that you want to do or say something to help them, but you're so afraid you're going to say the wrong thing, and you're so afraid you're going to make them cry. You're so afraid you're going to make it worse, so you don't say anything at all. And the third one is that you just don't have a clue. You just don't know what to do or say, and so you don't do anything. And I always try to tell people, I don't care how awkward it is. If you show up in love, it's the right thing. That's the right thing to do. Step out in love. Remember, it's not about you. It's about them. So put your fears on the back burner, whatever it is, and be with them. So anyway, after I figured out those 3 things, I just kept saying, gosh, if they only had like some kind of book or something that could have told them what to do or say, wouldn't that be great? We might still be friends today. Literally, that's what I was thinking. So one day I just started Googling it, and I got on Amazon. And when I go past the bookstore, I would walk in to see if I could find it, and I couldn't find it. And that's when I kept, I don't want to say I heard a voice, but it was, something was saying, look all you want, Sherrie, you're not going to find it because you're the one that's supposed to write it. Now I have had no aspirations of being an author at all. And again, I tried to fight it. Who am I to write something like this? I'm not an author. I'm not equipped. I'm not blah, 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 blah. And yet it wouldn't leave me. That's when you know it's divinely directed, because it won't leave you. It just keeps knocking, 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 knocking. So I decided to write it. And when I decided to write it, I became very serious. I said, I'm going to put it out on social media. That way, if I go to Kroger and someone sees me and they ask how the book's going, I have to tell them, right? It was kind of like being held accountable. In hindsight, I realized all I was doing was what I was doing all along my job as a television news anchor and reporter. I was just interviewing people, and I was just collecting their stories. But I was compiling that information, and I was putting it in a place where it was accessible to everyone, not just people in my viewing audience, but everyone.
Thankfully, I read that book. Thank you for sending that to me. The best books, at least in my opinion, we've talked about it. I'm not a reader, and I wasn't a reader up until from 9th grade when I read Animal Farm. I didn't read another book cover to cover until I wrote a book for myself in 2006. So that was, 1985 to 2006.
Mm-hmm.
Having written a book in a similar fashion where it was more divinely inspired, the books that resonate the most with me are the ones that tell stories in a way that is relatable and honest, and that I can hear the writer's voice or the person that's being interviewed's voice. And I can honestly say I did that with your book. So kudos to you, because I think that's the key to any good book, is if you can hear whoever the character is, or the author, who, whatever the person speaking is, if you can picture what their voice could be in your ears, I think that's the sign of a very good book. What I loved about your book is that it was very specific in its intent. It wasn't some grand theory of life. It was answering a really almost so obvious that it was hidden.
Right.
Because nobody wants to have that conversation, especially the person that doesn't know what the hell to say. But even more so, the person that is happening to,
Mm-hmm.
who is wondering why. Why is this person not in? Why don't they care? Why aren't they reaching out? Why aren't they involved? And it's so important for people to read, because everyone's had it. Everybody. There's very few people on this planet that haven't experienced personal loss.
Right.
And everybody, whether they want to admit it or not, is going through grief and is wishing someone would be there to help them through it. So that book, it doesn't necessarily call out anyone specifically, but it calls out a generic template of who do you fit into one of these boxes. And if so, maybe I can help you figure out what to say, how to handle it, whatever. And I think it's just, to me, it was such an obvious hidden gem that you uncovered, that with what you're planning on doing now as your calling, it's going to help so many people.
I hope so. I'm glad that you said that, because I think a lot of times when I was in the doubt stage, because I wrote it and then I put it up on the shelf, I didn't do anything with it. And the reason is because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't in your face, you need to do this, these people need, I did not want that at all. I wanted it to be, listen, we all get there. We all have these things that happen to us that we don't know what to do. We don't know what to say. If you get into a situation like this, pick up this book and go to your chapter, because it's not just about death. Death is my story, okay? But it's divorce. A lot of times there's always someone picking a side in a divorce. Losing your job. You don't know what to say sometimes. What if your buddy gets fired? Then what do you say? Cancer. How many times people, you just like, oh my gosh, and you don't know what to say. But the funniest thing about it, the thing that kept me humble through this whole process, was I had gone through the whole process of getting the book edited and picked it out, and was literally waiting on my proof back from CreateSpace. And before my book arrived, within 36 hours, 3 things happened. First, my niece's mother passed away in her sleep. Secondly, my parents come home from a doctor's appointment, and they said, the doctor thinks your dad has terminal lung cancer. And the third thing was, I went into work later that day, and a woman that I worked with told me that her daughter has a chronic illness that could turn terminal. And I didn't know what to say. I knew I didn't want to call my niece, because I couldn't do anything to bring her mother back. I couldn't do anything to make that situation any better for her. I didn't want to call my dad, because that was my dad. That's my rock. I can't be falling apart. And I literally thought this, oh my God, you just wrote a book on this. pick up the phone and do it. But I think, Matt, that had to happen so that I could be in those shoes, so that I could understand that kind of fear, that kind of sadness, that kind of feeling that will leave you paralyzed when it's that close to you.
I think
had to happen.
Amen to that. I 100% believe that, first of all, nothing's by coincidence. Everything is by design. And it's whether or not we notice it or not is really what changes people's courses in life. I mean, I'm in my book, I wrote that, there's probably hundreds of doors during my 13 years where I was depressed, where opportunity lied and was ready for me to do it, but I just couldn't see it.
Right.
But when it was time to open that door, my brother's hand was on it with me, making sure that I opened it. So those are moments that I'm 100% sure were brought to your attention and you identified them because it was meant to be at that moment for you to see whatever that next step is. I think you said something that really, I think, encapsulates what the person who doesn't make that phone call or doesn't reach out or doesn't provide the support is feeling is fear. And it's the most powerful, outside of love, the most powerful emotion. And it's the one that can cripple you the most. Love can sometimes make you make decisions that without thinking, which can also be harmful at times. But fear is the one that cripples you.
Right.
It's a paralyzing emotion, and people that are not equipped to handle trauma or sadness or awkward conversations, or that fear will then be the defining emotion that dictates the decisions they make. So it's not. I don't. And I think it's important to put out there that I don't think anybody that because someone's going to hear this go, I did that, right? They're going to be like, I was that person. And I don't think it's a blame issue. I think it's acknowledging that we do understand that fear was the guiding emotion in that decision. And that when you, in retrospect, and telling the story about my wife's sister, I went to the thing that was most comfortable for me.
We all do.
Which was to be the cop in a situation that I've done 1,000 times. And I think it was the right decision for the moment because I think it saved a lot of other people memories that maybe they would never want to have. But I robbed something from myself and from my wife and children at that same time.
Well, let me ask you this. Have they said that to you? Have they said, we wish you wouldn't have gone into cop mode?
Not directly to me. My wife and kids have not. They understand. But my wife and kids were they get me, and they understand my rationale when I make decisions, and they understand that everything I do is on a greater good level. But there has been
everyone grieves differently, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so not everyone cries when they grieve. So that's the first thing. But you were willing to step out and do things that people were probably unwilling or not even knowing what to do next. So
yeah, I think what
you did actually was provide them a gift. And I think that just because it was in that moment that you weren't there, consoling.
I think the perception that I felt at the time, and there was some comments made, but listen, I don't hold anybody
right
for comments. I get it. It was a crappy time and everybody was reeling. I couldn't have conversations about what was going to happen to her.
Right.
I couldn't spell it out to justify why I was doing what I was doing.
Right.
Because that would have been mean and hurtful and caused more problems. But it was one of those decisions where I had to. I was grieving. Like I love my sister-in-law, so I didn't want anybody to think I wasn't. You know what I'm saying? Like it probably came across like I wasn't grieving.
But you were there. You were still there. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I think I think that you need to give yourself a little more grace than what you're giving yourself. I think that you wish that you could have done the one thing, but you did what you were born to do.
I hope so. And I've had a lot of prayer about that. And I'm pretty much okay with it. I just want to make sure that she was, my sister-in-law. It's one of those things where you sort of
protected her dignity.
Yeah, I guess that's a good way of putting it. And it sucks
Protecting
that
their dignity.
I think that, when anybody who's been to war or has been through, um, people that run into danger instead of running from it, it's a sad but chosen path sometimes. Not everybody, talk about Vietnam War veterans who come back and they don't talk about the war. And it's because no one's ever going to understand what they saw and what they did. And to me, it's a chosen path to be in that world at times.
Mm-hmm.
And there are days where I can guarantee, and I can guarantee there are days when, and I've had them where I wished I didn't have to be that person. And that was one of those times where I wished I didn't have to be that person. And sometimes experience forces you to make decisions, because sometimes being dumb and stupid is is a good place to be and not aware of what's going on. And unfortunately, I don't live in that world. But I digress, and I didn't mean to go off on that tangent, but it was one of those things where I think.
I know. I get it though. I can feel that pull. And so one of the things that I want to tell people is that I wrote this book of what you can do and say to help someone when they're going through a tough time. But here's the shocker. There's nothing, not one sentence that's the perfect sentence, and not one thing that's the perfect thing that you can do to make it all better, because there's nothing that can make it all better, ever. What you want to do is be present and supportive, because everything's falling apart.
Yes.
You can't make it better. You can only be there to support and love.
And I think that's an important message, because I think as humans, and especially as men,
Fixers.
We're fixers, absolutely. And I've spent my life, and my wife, she'll be the first to attest that, and I have in almost 26 years that we've been together, I've become more of a listener and not as much of a fixer at times, but it is still intrinsically who I am. And sometimes when you're the fixer, but you don't know how to fix it, that's like a paralyzing moment too. Mm-hmm. And when you're not necessarily good with just holding a hand or giving a hug or showing up with a casserole, it's when your go-to move is fixing, and that's not an option, it kind of can paralyze you. So I think more so than anything, what I got from your book, while it hurt to live through what you lived through and have people abandon you, for lack of a better word, when you needed them, and it wasn't you needed a specific thing from them, you just needed them to be present, like you talked about. I think what your book tells people now is that if you find yourself in that spot, go against your instinct and go and just be present, because it's gonna just, and when my wife, and I'll give one real quick thing on being present that really helped me. My wife 2 years ago, whatever it was, had a hip replacement, and 5 weeks later fell down a flight of stairs and broke her femur, and had to have surgery on her femur and then a new hip put in. And she was literally immobile for 6 weeks and couldn't walk, couldn't put any weight on it. And I'm a full-time cop, I run a business, I have all these things going on, and I haven't cooked a meal since I was 22 years old. And it's like spaghetti or like hamburger helper, like that's really or cereal, and I was now responsible for everything, kids' food, our food, cleaning the house, and it was just, I was like in the weeds, deep in the weeds, and I couldn't figure out how to get it. I've never been in my life that helpless, because we rely on each other. Right. There's so many responsibilities to be covered. And then when her ability to do any of the things that she normally does is gone, I'm like, holy shit, I'm screwed. And my kids are going to be dirty and smelly and hungry, and they're not going to have anything to give, because I didn't think I was capable. And being present. I had a girl I went to high school with who I hadn't really seen in 20 years, but we're Facebook friends. She started a meal, like there's a website you can go to where people sign up to bring meals. And I didn't have to cook a meal for 6 weeks. People just
Isn't
brought
that
food.
beautiful?
And but
Yeah.
that's stepping up. That's that.
Yeah.
It was just a simple act of organizing and promoting, I need help, and people just sort of being present. And that's that. If people can break it down into what can you do for somebody who's going through a trauma or a tough situation, it's just the simple thing of knowing that someone was there. And whether it was a card, whether it was a phone call, whether it was, can I come sit and watch TV with you? Or, just something.
A
So you have
voicemail.
that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what I get the most from your book, is that we acknowledge that it's inside all of us, that I don't know what to do, oh shit, and go and do the opposite.
Right. And I always tell people too, I don't ever say what's wrong. I just say not so helpful. There's one thing that I want to let people know, and we have all said it at one time or another. If there's anything I can do, just let me know. Have you said that? Yes, I've said that. I have to keep myself from still saying that. This is why it's not helpful, because you're putting it on them. And they might not even know. When you're in the midst of, especially like grief, and it's new, you don't even know what day of the week it is. So for example, if it is what you do, a better way to say that same thing is to say, hey, can I come over and cut your grass, or get you guys a gift card, or take the kids to school? Okay. 3 things that you're willing to do for them, and let them choose from those 3 things that you're willing to do, or a few things. Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be 3, but you know what I mean.
Yep. Give
them something that you're willing to do. Can I do some laundry for you? Can I pick up some groceries for you at the store? I'm headed to the store. Don't ask them what they want, because they don't even know right now. And especially if role reversals, think about that. If it's a widow and they have, gender specific household duties, she's probably never even thought about cutting the grass.
My wife would have no idea how to start the lawnmower.
Yeah. Or shoveling snow, or putting salt down on the sidewalk. She might not have ever thought of that. Or if it's a guy, might not know how to wash clothes or make a meal. So think about things that, this is what she used to always do. I wonder if he needs help with that. And one of the best things that someone told me they did, they said their son was critically ill and was placed in a nursing facility, and the bills were stacking up, and just became so overwhelming. And she's got to go to work, and then she's got to go to the nursing facility to take care of her son. And someone who worked in medical billing said, can I go through those bills for you and help you sort them out? She said she just broke down and cried, because that was the best thing that someone could have. So we all have something we're good at. We're, that we can really lift a load off of people.
That's such a powerful, and it's non-specific. Like it's not when your grandmother dies, or when this is what you do. It's all about, it's taking a step back as the person who's wants to help but doesn't know how, taking a step back, looking at the person, because obviously you have some connectivity with the person who's going through the grief or the trauma or the loss or whatever the term is, and think about that person and go, what could they possibly need right now that I could potentially help with? And it takes 5 seconds to do that.
Right.
And the person who helped me with the food.
Yes.
If it wasn't for the fact,
best? I mean, weren't you just like, oh, thank God?
It was like Jesus came to my house. Like it was that big. And I'd never, and I've said it to her, but the heaviness I felt and the lack of, I've never in my life felt like I couldn't handle something. I'm always that guy. I'm just that guy. I figure shit out. That's improvise, adapt, and overcome. It's what I do. And the minute my wife, it made me value, number one, all the things that she does. And number two, it made me realize I need to start expanding my knowledge base a little bit more than what it currently is, because if I'm left to my own devices again, I'm screwed. So I can't always, count on somebody to do a meal thing for me. So I have to start to figure out how to be a little bit more self-sufficient. And it was so important for my wife, for me. My wife was stressing.
Mm-hmm.
She couldn't walk. She was in a ton of pain, and she couldn't help her family. And she felt helpless. So, I mean, it was this whole collective of help. And my kids were like, "What are we going to do, Dad?" And I'm like, "I don't know. We're going to have to figure this out." So I think your book, and we're going to put links to everything in when I post it on Facebook and all that stuff, but we're going to say them here. I want you to tell everybody where they can, the name of the book again, where they can find it, your website, social media, any of that good stuff, so people know where to get a hold of you.
Okay. It is called How Can I Help? Your go-to guide for helping loved ones through life's difficulties. But if you just put in How Can I Help, it'll come up. It's available on Amazon and, books, Barnes and Noble. But if you want an autographed copy, you can go to sherriedunlevy.com, and I'll be happy to sign a copy for you and send it out to you.
And that's Sherrie, SherrieDunlevy.com.
Correct.
Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Perfect. I've seen your name enough, so I think I had it memorized. Is there anything else you want to share with the people listening, that, like, a closing thought on your purpose, on why you're doing what you're doing, on the value of what it is you believe you can bring to someone else's life?
We all can make an impact. My son lived for 29 days and he did not speak a word. I never got to hold him. He never went to the finest schools. He never married the right girl. He never accomplished anything in life. I never even heard his voice. And yet he made such a deep and profound impact on me. And so we all have the ability to make an impact in this world and in this lifetime. And I feel it is my job to help inspire people to get up every day and don't just go through the routines. It's so easy. Think about what you're doing that can make an impact on someone else's life. And especially when someone's going through the roughest time of their lives, this is where you can make the biggest difference. And it doesn't have to take that much. All it has to do is take you stepping out of your fear and stepping out in love.
What a brilliant way to end the show. Hang tight. I'm going to close out the show here, and we'll talk off air, so to speak. Everybody, thank you for watching and listening to this episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast with my very special guest, Sherrie Dunlevy. Please go out and get her book. Go to her website, sherriedunlevy.com. How Can I Help is the name of her book. Everybody in this world has suffered some loss, some trauma, and has felt abandoned at one point in time in their life, whether it was by a loved one or a friend. And I think it's important to understand where that person was coming from when they made the choice to not be present. And I think it's also important to know how to handle when it happens to you. So I think everything that she's done thus far with her book and her speaking and her social media and her podcast. What's the name of your podcast? Let's put that out there real quick too.
All Things Awesome interviews, and now the Grief Anonymous podcast.
So please subscribe and rate and review her podcast. I was a guest on hers, so you can go and watch that as well. And I think everything you're doing is brilliant. I think your presence is amazing, and I think the impact you're about to make is one that you don't even know yet the value of it. So I think nothing but amazing things are on your future horizon. So thank you, everybody. Don't forget to go to my website, mattcubbler.com. You can find out everything about my speaking, the book, My Brother's Love, and the podcast was on there as well. Take care, everybody. God bless, and be kind to one another.